technically speaking, the next ban list update will happen no sooner than January 21st, 2019, which, if you're watching this video on the day that it's uploaded, is tomorrow. However, I don't think the ban list actually will be updated tomorrow. I think that is extremely unlikely. More so, I think that the ban list is going to happen sometime after YCS Chicago and before YCS Atlanta. There are a few reasons for that. First off, it seems like Konami, just historically speaking, has not been really up to date with making these ban lists new on the day that they say they will. Keep in mind that that sentence actually isn't saying that the ban list will be updated right on January 21st. It just says that it won't be updated before that. A lot of people get confused about that. I've made an entire video talking about why that is, but I do think that they will wait until after YCS Chicago. I think they want to see how the current format will change when they add Savage Strike. We obviously have the Savage Strike sneak peek this weekend, and then we have the YCS Chicago, which is the first event with Savage Strike on the next weekend, and I think that Konami wants to see how that'll affect the metagame. Without a doubt, though, they will have to do a ban list sometime because there are currently tons of top decks that have been around for like almost a year now, and I think Konami is kind of sick of that. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about my ban list predictions for whenever it happens, whether or not that's in January or February, or maybe they even push it back to March if they really feel the format is perfectly fine. I'm not entirely sure, but I just want to do my predictions in this video. This isn't a wish list video. I know a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. I personally do not, though. A prediction list is what I think Konami is going to do. A wish list is what I want Konami to do. So in today's video, we're going to focus on trying to predict what Konami might do with the next ban list. Keep in mind that this video is being made before we know the exclusives and imports in Savage Strike. Maybe Needle Fiber will come out and completely change all these predictions. Maybe if Needle Fiber comes out, we won't actually need some of these decks hit. I'm not entirely sure, but at the time of making this, we don't know the imports for Savage Strike. We don't know the TC exclusives, so it might change a little bit. But in general, I don't think it would, because I think even if Konami gave us a card like Needle Fiber or some game-changing cards in Savage Strike, I think for the most part, they would want to hit many of the cards I'm already going to talk about just because they've been around for so long. So without further ado, let's jump right in. First off, I think Sky Striker Engage has to be hit. I've said this time and time again. It seems like Sky Strikers have been a top performing deck for so long now, and that's cool because Sky Strikers were actually very expensive when they first came out. You have Engages at like $90 to $100, so I guess it's cool to give people like their money's worth now they've had a chance to play a tier 1 deck for like 9 months, but I think it's finally time to take this deck down a notch. Obviously, it has been hit already with Hornet Drones going to 1. Did that make a big difference though? I'm not entirely sure. Sky Strikers seem better than ever despite the fact that they have 1 Hornet Drones, and despite the fact that one of the best decks of the format is basically a direct counter to Sky Strikers, and that's Thunder Dragons. Despite all these things though, they seem to still be a top pick, and I think that one of the reasons is because Engage is just such an independently powerful card. Archetype Searcher cards are always very popular, especially when they're found in meta strategies, so obviously Engage is going to be very popular for a lot of people, but I think what makes Engage so good, yes, it's the draw 1 effect that makes a huge difference. It turns this card into sort of an archetype specific pot of greed almost, but I think the thing that makes Engage truly broken, truly overpowered, is the fact that you can abuse it and reuse it over and over and over again with cards like Kagari and Multi-Roll. Those cards existing I don't think is enough to actually warrant a banning of Engage, but definitely semi-limiting or limiting Engage seems to be where Konami would want to go with the deck. It seemed like limiting Hornet Drones, the idea was that Engage and the Sky Striker engine would be less splashable, and that certainly happened, but Sky Strikers are still such a powerful deck. They're just so consistent. They can do so many different things, and I think hitting Engage in some way or another will definitely be the way to go if Konami wants to shake up the metagame. And of course, whenever you hit the most powerful deck and the most consistent deck of the format, you always want to be looking towards the second best deck, because if the first best deck is taken out of power, the second best deck is suddenly become the best deck of the format. So I think Konami, if they're wanting to make the ban list as balanced as possible, they need to hit Thunder Dragons too, and hitting Thunder Dragons is a little bit more difficult than hitting Sky Strikers, because pretty much every Thunder Dragon card recycles itself in some way, shape, or form. If you limit any of the main deck monsters, you run the issue of where Thunder Dragon Fusion can just recycle them indefinitely, and the same goes for the fusion monsters. But I think the #1 way to hurt Thunder Dragons is to limit Thunder Dragon Colossus. Now, I don't know if Konami will go that far. Maybe they'll just semi-limit the card, but it's very, very difficult to actually hit Thunder Dragons. They're sort of along the similar vein as something like Burning Abyss or Dragon Rulers, not necessarily in power level because they're not as good as those two decks were in their prime, but in terms of the fact that all the cards basically do the exact same thing. But I think Thunder Dragon Dragon Colossus is the least recyclable card in the deck. It's a card that you want to summon a bunch of copies of on turn 1, whereas many of the other cards that you're recycling, you don't really care about resolving them more than once in a single turn, so Thunder Dragon Fusion can easily put them back. But Colossus and ending on multiple Colossus is the main end goal for Thunder Dragons, so I think hitting that card in some way, shape, or form is pretty likely for Konami to do. I don't know if they will because it's an expensive secret rare, but it seems like something that they'd want to do if they hit Sky Strikers. The only other card that I really thought of was Thunder Dragon Dark, and the reason that that card I thought of was like the other thing that they would hit is because it's the best main deck one, and it's one that they always play 3 of. Sometimes, and we've seen players like Jesse Cotton play this really crazy version of Thunder Dragons where a lot of the Thunder Dragons in the deck are just 2 ofs, but Dragon Dark is pretty much always a staple 3 of because it's the main searcher of the deck, adding anything from your deck to your hand, and also it's one of the ways that you can trigger Titan on your opponent's turn along with Egg, which really makes Titan very, very powerful and keeping your opponent from actually dealing with your multiple Colossus because you have one Titan destroying 2 of your opponent's cards, really making the Thunder Dragon board a lot more difficult to break. So I'm not sure how Konami will hit Thunder Dragons if they hit Thunder Dragons, but I think the likely candidates are Colossus and Dragon Dark. Beyond that, I think it is finally time for Konami to do something about Altergeist. This is where I'm sort of talking about where I don't think they're going to hit anything before YCS Chicago, and I think the big reason is they want a deck like Altergeist to be at full power for at least one event. Now, what do you mean by full power? All the Altergeist cards are out. That is true, but we are getting Pot of Indulgence and Savage Strike, which is at its best in Altergeist. It probably will be played in other decks, but the deck that it is the best in is Altergeist by far because they have no conflicting cards with it and they don't care about the extra deck. So I think Konami will want to hit Altergeist after Indulgence comes out, after Altergeist gets to use it for like a month or 2. I think the way to do that is the exact same way that the OCG hit the deck the first time that they hit it, and that's semi-limiting Multi-Faker, maybe semi-limiting Spoofing. But as it stands right now, Altergeist are definitely a good deck, but for a while, up until like this last month and a half, there's only like 1 or 2 Altergeist topping every single event. Nothing along the lines of like 10 tops like Sky Strikers and Thunder Dragons were having, or even Goki before Firewall Dragon got banned. So Altergeist have sort of always been the underdog right up until like the last month and a half. Now we have them sort of secured as the 3rd best deck of the format, taking a lot of top spots at every single YCS, and with Indulgence coming out, they're expected to take even more top spots. So I think Altergeist should be taken down a notch. Obviously, I'm a little biased here because I play the deck, but I think semi-limiting Multi-Faker makes the most sense. It makes it a little bit harder to open. You won't open the Impermanence Faker combo anymore. You force the players to actually have to search Multi-Faker instead of just hard drawing it, and anytime that you can just hard draw the Multi-Faker, it's a lot better than searching it. Even when you're using cards like Personal Spoofing to grab it, which is obviously very powerful, a lot of times your opponent just has the Ghost Ogre or the Ash Blossom to stop the spoofing, and that is definitely a really big deal to Altergeist players. So I think semi-limiting Multi-Faker is pretty obvious for Konami to do. It's what they did in the OCG before limiting the card. I don't think they're going to go that extreme. The deck isn't that overpowered right now, unless Indulgence really does break Altergeist way more than I think it's going to, but in general, I think semi-limiting Faker and nothing else is like the way to go for the Altergeist deck as far as the themed cards go. That being said though, even though I don't think any other Altergeist cards are actually worth hitting as far as the theme goes, there is a off-theme card that is found in Altergeist and Thunder Dragons that I think Konami really has to address after YCS Sydney, and that is Rivalry of Warlords. Now this is one of the best floodgates in the entire game, and it's sort of been allowed to roam free right alongside Gozen Match. And while Gozen Match is very powerful right now, there aren't as many decks that can play that card versus Rivalry of Warlords, which Altergeist and Thunder Dragons can play without even blinking. It doesn't affect their strategies at all, and that is a pretty big deal because that card is extremely good against a variety of decks. Not only is it hitting meta decks like Sky Strikers and Goki and anything along those lines, it's also very powerful against many rogue decks, which just gives decks like Altergeist and Thunder Dragons way too many free wins. Obviously, if you saw the YCS Sydney finals, you'll know that that card is incredibly deadly in an Altergeist strategy, basically winning the match single-handedly. Not that that player wasn't good, not that he didn't know what he was doing, but in that particular match, Rivalry of Warlords basically won him the match. As someone that has played Altergeist at many events, I wouldn't say that I just win every single game off of the rivalries, but I definitely have won a ton of games off of just flipping that card and my opponent not having an out. The card is simply way too good for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It is a floodgate that you don't have to activate before your opponent does stuff, and that's what makes it so good. Because if you think of like going against pendulums, once your opponent has like set up a board, you can't just flip an anti-spell fragrance because now they already have a board. But what makes Rivalry and Goes and Match so darn good is the fact that you can flip it after your opponent has built a board, it breaks their entire board and prevents them from doing further actions. It's just way too powerful as a floodgate card because it actually breaks boards instead of just preventing them like most floodgates out there. I think this card has to get hit on the next list. I will definitely miss it as an Altergeist player, and maybe Secret Village of the Spellcasters is a better card to hit, but I think in terms of how many different decks Rivalry actually stops and how hard it is for many decks to out, I think it has to go. I think it's a much more important hit than Secret Village of the Spellcasters is. I think Konami will take the initiative and actually ban this card or limit this card on the next list. I think they'd be kind of crazy not to, if I'm being completely honest, just because so many people complain about it, and it definitely is a degenerate floodgate that shouldn't be in the game. And lastly, even though this deck is not really taking top cuts by storm, you're not really seeing a ton of them at every single YCS top 32, you're just seeing a few of them sneak in there. I really think Konami is looking to hit Goki / Dark Warrior deck / any extra linking deck once again. Now these types of decks have taken tons of hit in the past. Obviously you have Firewall Dragon that's banned, obviously you have Nightmare Goblin that got banned, but there are still cards that are way too good. I think Gumblar Dragon would be a card that Konami could be looking to get rid of, but then you still have the issue of extra linking. You still have the issue that as long as Isolde and Summon Sorceress are out, anytime you release good link monsters, a warrior based deck, and not necessarily just Gokis, but any sort of warrior based deck now has the opportunity to do these crazy first turn combos, take like 15 minutes. Now these things aren't that popular. I mean, this deck isn't the most represented deck in Top Cut. It's about the 4th best deck, but it's not fun to play against, and a lot of times it just feels like a coin flip. I think Konami is really looking to hit that deck in some way, shape, or form. I thought they were going to hit Summon Sorceress or Isolde on the last ban list, but they hit Firewall Dragon instead. But I think the deck, even though it's not the most popular deck, even though it's not the best deck out there, even with Neospace Conductor, by the way, which a lot of people thought was just going to break the game, I still think the deck is degenerate enough that Konami should hit those types of strategies. This is especially true if Konami gives us Needle Fiber in the next like 3 months or so, because then they really don't want Needle Fiber at the same time as Summon Sorceress. That just seems like a terrible idea. It's pretty much ruined the OCG format for like the last year or so. People shouldn't have Needle Fiber and Summon Sorceress in the same format. They're too good with each other. I think Konami will try to hit one of those cards. Also, they have sort of reprinted Summon Sorceress, so it's not an expensive card anymore. Europe has gotten a chance to actually use it, so I think now is the time for Konami to hit that card. I don't know if they'll go that far. I don't know if they'll actually pull the trigger on hitting the warrior-based extra link strategies, but it is not fun getting Gumblard for 6. That is just not something that you want to have happen, and I don't think Konami will let it happen any longer, but I've been wrong before. Anyway though, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's discussion video on what I think is going to happen on the next ban list. Maybe I'll get around to doing a wishlist video. I got a lot of stuff on my plate though in terms of video ideas I'm doing this coming week. I don't know if we'll get around to doing a ban list wishlist video, but let me know in the comment section below what you think Konami will do on the next list. I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.